Hello YouTubers, it's Travis and we're back for something a little different. This is something that I did on stream and I need you to tell me in the comments if this is good YouTube content or not. Because it might be, but it might not be. So I need you to let me know if you like this or not. So here's what was going on. Every day during the stream I will have to eat lunch, and when I do eat lunch, way back in the day we just wouldn't do anything. This stream would just kind of watch me, just stare at me for like 3 minutes while I hurriedly ate some soup. And that wasn't really good for my digestion, and it probably wasn't entertaining content. Although again, there's somebody that's like, yeah, eat that soup, man. And don't worry, you're still gonna get to see that, because what we're gonna do today is I'm gonna have my lunch at a reasonable pace while chat asks me questions about Limited and I teach one little lesson that I thought of. So you're gonna get to not only learn some about Limited, we're kind of going to get to share our lunch break. So if this is your lunch break and you're at work and you're about to eat your own soup or chicken McNuggets or Subway or tuna salad or whatever it is that you're going to eat, go ahead and pop it open and let's have a little lesson together. And do please let me know, again, in the comments here and by like sharing this if you think it's useful, if this is something that you'd like to see more of, less of, or if you kind of don't care, that's fine too. I hope that you'll enjoy. So this is my first attempt at the lunchtime lesson. We'll see how this works. I've had a lot of people ask me how to build a mana base for Limited. I think that's a very fair question and something that we can talk about. The first thing I need to do, and I told you this would be an interactive, this would be an interactive experience. So there's going to be some participation required because I'm eating lunch. I need somebody to work a hypergeometric calculator and tell me what are the odds of having 3 lands in your opening draw if you're playing 16, 17, and 18 lands. How much are we moving that needle by playing an additional land? Bon appetit, Martin. So this is combination limited lesson and mukbang. Three or more. It's not for me for this set because I didn't craft the whole set yet. Afternoon, Limestone. Wow, so it's moving 5%. That's huge. Holy crap. Okay, so this is a big deal. I knew it mattered. I didn't know it mattered that much. Can anybody check Alden's Hex's work? Can we get a second source to go back and check that? Because that is big if true. What are the chances of drawing 3 or more lands in your opener with a 16, 17, and 18 land deck? Five, but yeah. You got the same results, Orcish? Because if we're doing that math right, that's a big deal. Iggy's going to get us an exact answer? Okay, cool. I'm having Campbell's Heart Healthy Sirloin Burger Soup, which is pretty tasty and helping to lower my blood pressure. Campbell's, if you're looking to sponsor a stream, I know a guy. Nope, don't care about any of that. Iggy, I'm going to let Iggy come back. So I've got like 5 people. It doesn't matter. We're on the play. Sure. Go ahead. If Iggy comes back with the same numbers, then I have a lot to share with you about your limited mana base. 100%, that's sweet. All right, I'm going to assume that those numbers are correct. I've had enough people come back, and if Iggy comes back and talks to me, we can change it. Yeah, I'm sure it's not exact, but that means the most important decision that you make about building your mana base is how many lands you're going to play. So this question about, do I need 10 mountains and 7 islands? The first thing you got to answer is how many lands am I going to play? Now remember, in best of 1, you're going to get that 60% chance twice, right? Whereas in best of 3, you're not. So you're significantly more likely to have your extra lands. Yeah, Iggy's coming back with the same numbers. Okay, so everybody's confirmed this. Thank you all for researching that. So the first thing we got to figure out is how many lands do we want to play? And in best of 3, it's almost never 16. Because you've got a pretty small chance at keeping a 2-lander and getting there. Right? Let's take a look at some cards that would give you a reason to play 18. Because for me, I want to make sure that I'm not getting mana screwed. Keeping a 2-lander, not drawing the next land is bloody terrifying, right? Like if we were going for an actual ratio, we would want to play a third lands, right? So we should really be playing about 13 lands in a 40-card deck. Is that correct? Like, why aren't we playing 13 lands? People used to argue for that, by the way. 20 years ago, people talked about that. You should play 13 lands. Okay, fair enough. I'll go ahead and answer this one. It's because your opener is so important that you have to be able to count on having those openers, and mulliganing is very punishing. So if we're looking at this, let's look at some types of cards that would make you want to play more or less lands. It's basically a type of deck that would make you want to play less lands. And I wish they saved the decks because I don't think I have a great example of that here. But I can kind of envision one, and we did play one. I had one earlier in this format that was a red-white deck that's curve literally stopped at 4 and then had some flashbacks that could go to 5. Like, it was a very low-to-the-ground deck with a lot of 2-drops. I ran 16 lands in that deck pretty confidently and comfortably and was not unhappy with it. So that'll come up on occasion. The harder thing to recognize is when should you be looking to run 18 lands? And I think a lot of people missed that in the last set. Yeah, sure, Limestone. Show me some examples. I'd be happy to look at those. But like, one of the things I liked about AFR, at least in best of 3, was Bag of Holding. This was a perfect excuse to run 18 lands. Just run extra lands, throw them under here. You'll find what you need eventually. Essentially, any mana sink is a reason to run more lands. So something like Gretchen is another excuse to run more lands, right? A mana sink, it's important to understand, is something that you can activate repeatedly to gain advantage. So a mana sink is something like Gretchen. I can keep doing this forever. Bag of Holding, I can keep doing this forever. Flashback is not a mana sink. It's essentially a complicated version of Kicker, right? Will a 16 land or 18 land deck break the 17 land stata? That's pretty good. So like as you're looking through here, if you see something that has flashback, that's not a mana sink. And I see a lot of people get confused in that. There were a lot of good mana sinks in blue, specifically in AFR as an example, so I was running 18 lands pretty consistently. I have not found that to be the case in Innistrad. And we've also got an interesting situation where in Innistrad, functionally most of these cards are all cheap. Like, we could look at this too. Heck, we can just look at common and uncommons in AFR. How many of them were 6 or 7 plus? And we've got, looks like a whole page of them, which I think that'll be pretty striking when we switch it here, and there's 3, right? So there were 4 times as many 6 plus drops at common and uncommon in AFR as opposed to here, which means even if you want to draft a slow dirtily deck, it's kind of difficult here because you have to get one of these 3 cards at uncommon. There's no commons. So I'd say the first thing to pay attention to when you're building your mana base is, does my deck have access to mana sinks, true mana sinks, things that you can repeatedly dump mana into? If you've got about 2 or 3 of those, you probably want to run 18 lands. All 3 of those 6 drops that I showed you are very powerful, Iggy. But sure, let's stay focused on the mana bases and what we're talking about. Even if they're just fine, it kind of doesn't matter, right? So if you have 2 or 3 mana sinks, or even just 2 good ones, I'd say you can absolutely run 18 lands and feel pretty confident about it. Essentially what you're doing when you do that is planning on flooding out. "16 lands don't show up very often in best of 3, at least they shouldn't. So you're planning to make your deck flood out, and the idea is that once you have, you'll use that extra mana on the mana sinks to draw more cards. Some people will say that card draw means you can play less land. I found it to be the opposite. With card draw, I want to play more land so that I can just kind of make sure I can consistently hit my land drops. So like I also count a lot of card draw as reasons to play more lands. But the real question people get into, generally speaking, is what colors of lands should I be playing? How are we going to do a splash, right? I think a big part of that, and there's people that will give you like, count your number of pips and then do math for that and start to figure it out. Most limited decks are going to be 9/8, and that's fine. What's up, Vincent? Yeah, we're going to get into talking to some about that, Iggy. Because generally speaking, I'm very nearly always getting a consistent mana base. If you pick Evolving Wilds heavily, going 8/8 with an Evolving Wilds is so nice. But you can look here for starters to see how many pips you have. But you also want to look at how many double colored cards you have. That might be a clue that you should play more, and where the specific cards show up in your curve. If you've got a lot of early blue and all of your green is late, like this is just an example of a deck that doesn't care. It's happy to just play 8/8 in the Evolving Wilds, right? But I imagine if we consistently go through these, we will find other decks that are a little bit different. And like, here's one that's splashing, which is a question a lot of people have. Is like, when do you splash? How do you splash? So I can tell you right now, this is a bad deck. This is a deck that certainly shouldn't be splashing. It kind of doesn't have playables. Like, I played this in one of the sweatsuit tournaments. It was early in the draft format. I didn't quite know what I was doing, and this deck was bad. This deck was bad, and I lost quickly. I also misplayed. I did get through the first round, but we can at least look at what I'm looking for when I splash, which is I want 1, 2, 3 sources. If I've got 3 sources to enable a splash, it's reasonable. Now, the other big one is, should you be splashing? Is the card a bomb or giving you access to something the deck doesn't have access to otherwise? And the answer here is no. I shouldn't be splashing a Sunrise Cavalier. I know that now. I apparently didn't know that when we did this draft. You got one from Kaladesh. If you want to put it in the Discord, I can show it up here. Because like you need to accept that whenever you're splashing, you are making your mana base less consistent, right? Because this deck still wants to be doing early stuff with green and white. And it kind of can't if I draw the mountain or have to pop an Evolving Wilds to get the mountain. And it's also really hurting Defend the Celestus and Sereth for me to have only 8 sources, right? Like, imagine a draw of Plains, Forest, Evolving Wilds, and we've got these 2 in hand. Like, we're very tempted and pushed to go get a Forest with the Evolving Wilds, but then we might draw the Cavalier and not be able to play it. So if you're going to water down your deck, I think you really need to have like a conclusive reason to do that, and the Cavalier is not that. I decided, Tommy, that while I'm having lunch, rather than just be like, let you stare at me eating, maybe we could try to do a limited lesson. So let's look at this deck and see if we actually think this is supposed to be 17 lands, or if Limestone was correct. Why is it showing the wrong thing on my browser window? I wanted to show this. Okay, now it is. Good. Boop. So what is the argument that this should be a 16 land deck? It's relatively cheap. It doesn't have any card draw or mana sinks. Like really the only thing it's got going for card draw is SRAM. And it does stop at 5. I don't know, sometimes when I'm playing 5 drops, I want to play the 17 lands anyway, but I can sort of see it here. I think like a lot of times I'll have decks that have an even faster curve than this. There's no rummaging here either. So there's no rummagers, there's no looters. But like, that's kind of where I'm at, Tommy. If I'm running 5 drops, I usually run 17. So I think I might have run 17 here or cut the Mastodons for 2 drops. But like, I don't hate putting 16 in here. It's just like, be aware, it's a good bit of time you're not going to get to 3 or 4 lands early. That's certainly part of it too, Iggy. And there's a question of, does a format really punish stumbling or flooding? And it's been so long since I played Kaladesh, I honestly don't remember. It's also worth noting that this was very likely a best of 1 deck, wasn't it, Limestone? It was best of 3, okay. It does say the record was 3-0. I don't know, this one's awful close to me. The idea with most aggro decks is that you want to be able to curve out, but you're nervous about the land count. You will have to mulligan more often if you're playing a dedicated aggro deck. But I still don't think this is like a dedicated aggro deck, right? Like we're playing, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish aggressive 2 drops. No ones, and like we're clogged up at 4 too. This looks like a good deck to me, and it obviously did well. But you can do that if you want. It's just probably worth knowing about the math. I think the biggest other thing to me that I want to make sure we cover, if we're going to call this a lunchtime lesson, is when to build a 10-7 mana base. And I think I want to try to make an example of that if I can. It's just hard because these decks don't often come together. Yeah, this one's not I can't turn that one into an example of it. Maybe I can with this. Man, that's a clunker too. This is a good example of when to splash though, because I've got the mana base that can pull off the splashing, and looking through here, what's the removal suite if not for the power word kill? This is literally the only interaction that I have. I probably have less 10-7s than other people because I tend to value Evolving Wilds and Fixing incredibly highly, even for 2-color decks. This was a 17 land deck. I only had 1 mana sink, realistically. But even looking at it now, I want to play an extra land in it, which is funny to me. But like, I guess we've got the 2 spoils of the hunt. I can almost see why I was splashing this, but I could also see just taking it out. I don't know that you really need it. Ulukard. Thank you very much for the year of support. Y'all spam some cats for Ulukard. I gotta peek around just a minute and see if I can find a deck that I could make into that sort of deck. Because it's usually one where you're top loaded on 2 drops for something. There's another reason to, well, I say this is another reason to run 18 lands. It's not another reason to run 18 lands. It's the same reason to run 18 lands. But Dominaria was a great example of a format where you wanted to play 3 colors, the fixing was garbage, and you had mana sinks everywhere. I think I won the sweatsuit with this, if I remember correctly. But we had a mana sink here. We had a very flexible card here that we could cast on 4 or cast later. We had a mana sink here where also we're going to have to sacrifice creatures. And equipment is a sort of like a mana sink as long as you have something in play, because you can repeatably sink mana into it. So I think this was just another good example of here's a reasonable 18 land deck. Also, one of our 18 lands was a spell. Whenever there's spell lands, it's super easy to put in an 18 land deck. But the last thing I want to find is that 10-7 deck, and I may have to make one as opposed to showing you one. Because I hardly ever do that. So let's take whatever this deck is and adjust it so that it's a 10-7 deck. It's an 18 land deck. Yeah, anything that you want linked, you'll need to either whisper to each other or put in the Discord. No links here. Just having lunch and a little lesson today. But the easiest way is probably to find a deck and just change it to one that looks like a 10-7 deck. So I guess I'm going to have to do that. That'll probably be easier for me to do in this format. So let's take out this splash. Add in some more green cards, and I think I could make this a deck that we would want to run 10-7 in. I want to get it to where the green is obviously what we want early. Yeah, something like that. And let's get out a lot of the white. Almost to the, okay. Yeah, this is starting to look like a deck I could justify 10-7 in already, and I haven't even changed that much of it. All right, so you take this deck and move it to 19-7 on the pips. All of a sudden, this deck looks like a 10-7 deck because you're like, okay, I have to have green early. I've got multiple double greens that I'd like to slam down. I've got green activated abilities, and my white is basically just there to complement the green. And at a certain point, you might even think about cutting something like Join the Dance or the Candlegrove Witch for another green 2-drop that you have in your sideboard. So say we don't have a Wilds, and I'm looking at this, and I'm like, this deck needs to hit green. It would really like double green on turn 3 into turn 4. Like all of a sudden, once you have this, you're like, hey, maybe we could have a 10-7 mana base. So I think that comes up pretty rarely. I think generally speaking, I'm going to default to 17 lands, very rarely play 16 and play 18 when I can get 2 mana sinks. And I'm usually going to default to 9-8 on my heaviest color, although in rare circumstances, I could see going 10-7. I've had a few decks in some weird formats. Dominaria was one of them where you could almost have monocolored decks. Like it could happen every once in a while where I actually went 11-6. I think I had a blue deck one time that had 3 red cards in it. And I just went 11-6 and it was fine. But that's incredibly rare. 10-7 is stretching it a bit much. And I don't even do that much. So these are my thoughts for a lunchtime lesson. Hopefully this was somewhat useful. And maybe we can think of a different one to do tomorrow so we can constantly learn stuff. That would be good. It's good to learn. Any more questions while I finish my last few bites of soup? Was this useful? Was this interesting? Was this stupid? I've seen this before. This is an old article. It's a decent article. But it's also like arguing that if you want to hit your 5-drop consistently, you need to be playing 18 lands. But it's also got the math in here for like 25 lands. I don't know why you would do that. Oh, I guess because it's for constructed. So these numbers really don't mean anything for me, do they? Weird. Okay. Question would be, would you ever consider running 16 lands with 2 Evolving Wilds since they thin? I don't think thinning is that important. Okay, so limited's here too. I need to scroll down. Okay, this is Andy's link. Thank you. Unlimited. Okay. Yeah, so you're 75% to hit your land on turn 5 if you're playing 17, but playing 18 bumps it up a whole 7%. Like, yeah, in formats where you can't miss a land drop, it's okay, Phil, sir, I understand. So, thinning a land, I don't think matters that much in limited, although it's certainly relevant. It's not why I'm running the Evolving Wilds. I'm running the Evolving Wilds so that I can get consistency in my mana base. And looking at this, it just seems to be making the same point. Like, you need to run more lands in formats where you can't miss a land drop. AFR was a good example of that. And if there's good mana sinks, I can run 18 and be happy about it. If there's not, I'm going to get nervous. But anyway, I'm running the Evolving Wilds to fix my mana. So the fact that it also helps thin the deck can be a thing, but there's also times where that gets awkward, right? Like say I've got 2 lands in my opener, one's an Evolving Wilds, and I really need to hit the 3rd. There have been times where I'm like, I can't crack this Evolving Wilds now because I have to draw another land, right? So as much as it's going to help you, it will also hurt you because there's times you don't want to thin a land out of the deck. Like the thinning also matters more in games that are going to go longer because we're talking about like a 1% chance of changing anything. That may not even be helpful. Yeah, the duels in Zendikar were another excuse to technically play more lands, because half of your lands, 2 lands in your deck were like bad creatures or bad spells, unless you needed them to be a land, in which case they were. The mechanics like that make it easier to play more lands, I'm always going to love. The problem was with the ones in Zendikar, they were way overvalued. Like there were people early in that format suggesting that those were the first picks out of every pack, that that's how good they were. But I suppose that's neither here nor there. And with that, my soup bowl is empty, and so our limited lesson for today is done. Big thank you to my patrons. I appreciate your support. If you would like to support the content that I'm producing here on YouTube, there's a link below to my Patreon. You can see your name up here in lights as well as get some other cool rewards. Thank you very much, patrons. And again, y'all let me know if you like this new idea for content because it's kind of something, I think we've done 2 of them now, so would really love to hear your feedback. Thank you all.